If someone was to start a podcast today, what are some of the key things you're giving advice-wise to get them off the ground running well?
So the first thing you need to focus on is going to be your strategy, right? This is where 99% of people mess it up. They say, hey, I want to start a podcast, and they go off in a random direction. The first step is understanding who is a for and the problem that you're solving. The reason why most podcasts don't grow is because they're not solving any problem, right? They start off and they're like, I'm a relationship podcast, and they go on, they get some OnlyFans chicks and all this kind of stuff on their content. But then 6 months later, like, why is the episode not growing, and why is no audience coming back, and also why am I not making money? So I think the unique mechanism that we've been able to focus on is solving a specific problem. So let's just take the example of health, right? If you have a nutrition podcast and it's deep down the levels of different types of nutrition, you're coming on analyzing vegan diets, carnivore diets, whatever, right? As detailed as possible. Then you are someone who's helping a large volume of people with something that's a very big market, which is nutrition. From there, you're building this cult following because the people that are coming back are the people that are really interested in this vertical, and you're positioning yourself as the authority. So I think there's this kind of platitude era whereby people are just putting out anything for engagement, whereas if you slow down on this and really focus on becoming the authority, giving out like really good valuable content that solves their specific problems, you build this very strong cult. We've worked with a lot of shows like this that could be in the finance space, there could be trading shows, and they're guys that cut through the noise of like, generic trading content that's kind of like BS. And they're giving them very, very specific details on like what's working for them and the lessons they have. These shows are absolutely blowing up. I mean, like 100,000, 200,000 views per episode, long form episode. And the reason being is because that individual is an authority and has influence in there. And that's been the biggest thing for me, right? Is that, you mentioned like a bullish on podcasting. The reason being is because like when you go deep on one vertical, you become that niche. You become that word, you kind of own that word. So I think for me, that's been this primary focus, is get podcasts to solve actual problems. And then if you're thinking, oh, well, I'm still early on in the day, I'm still trying to feel things out, you lean into your experiences. If you have a background in fitness and you're building this new app, you don't need to educate people on like, this is it, like this is verbatim of how you do something, but you're also sharing your experiences. You're sharing your experiences as a founder who's building a tech platform, which is super complicated, it's super difficult. There's a lot of challenges here. And most guys are not sharing their experiences. They're not sharing like what's happening in their life, the highs, lows, the challenges, the obstacles, because that's what people pull to, right? People buy the story, not the product. So over time, if we're able to basically share a lot of that insight, you become that authority figure. And as time goes on, I think like it's going to be YouTube. It's going to be the focus, right? It's always going to be YouTube for content, I think, going forward. And YouTube is going to run over Apple and Spotify pretty soon. I said this in 2020, and people wanted to like do death threats on my door. Bear in mind, and 4 years later, it became true. But basically, having that first focus, you become that main source of information. And the reason why I'm saying with YouTube and the problem solving is because let's use an example of when people start searching on Google and they say, how do I pick the perfect like keto diet? A lot of the content that's going to come up is going to be video. Google search now returns over 65-70% video, and we want basically that to be the key search. And then from there, it's just about growing the machine, feeding the machine weekly. I would nearly advise weekly, if not bi-weekly episodes, just to keep the machine going. I had a call with someone yesterday, and they really wanted to grow their like personal development podcast, and there was a gap of like 4 months, and they're like, "Oh, we just had a small break." And I was like, that's the problem. This guy's talking about like doing all these reels and stuff. And I'm like, dude, that's the problem, not this, So I think sometimes there needs to be that objective view to think like, okay, is this really what I want to do? And if you truly want to grow a podcast, you have to look, can you do it 100 times over? Because otherwise you're not going to stick with it, right? I can get on podcasts now and almost like, naturally, organically pull out some of the ideas and share some of the insights for people and interview people with very little even preparation. Sometimes I can interview people. And I just think that because I've been kind of playing that longer term view, it's been easier for me to piece this together as time goes on, because a lot of guys will get in and they'll quit 3 episodes in, 7 episodes in, 21 episodes in. But thankfully, I'd like to say a lot of our shows have got to the 20 episode mark that we've launched, and a lot of the other shows are doing much more higher numbers than that. But yeah, that would be my approach: 0 to 1 in the beginning and keeping it somewhat simple.
Do you think some people early doors are kind of too focused on what short content they get out of the podcast that they forget to actually have a good podcast?
That's a good question. Yeah, so that's definitely been engineered as like a bug of the system, I would say, that people are like focused too much on short form versus the actual long form itself. Now, at the same time, if that encourages more people to record podcasts, I would still encourage it, because like I know some of the biggest podcasters in the world are being coached on this stuff. Like they're being coached on asking shorter questions. They're being coached on getting shorter responses for short form and whatnot. So it's a feature, but I don't think it's definitely a negative of the industry. If anything, I think it's a positive, right? The more shorts that I see going viral of podcasts just cements podcasts more in society, right? They're just much more
Yeah.
of an embedded piece. The distribution mechanism is something that we're obviously heavily embedded in. That's how you get your voice out there. And I think podcasts are so difficult to grow as it is because the retention is so low. Unless your show is like really engaging, it's really clicked with
Yeah.
people. So if people want to use alternative mechanisms like shorts, LinkedIn posts, Instagram posts, even Snapchat, Twitter, newsletter, to bring that engagement back to the long form, I'm all for that. That's part of our flywheel. Like we have like a full flywheel of like 6 or 8 different verticals. So if we're running a show, we're hitting them on all of those different verticals. Because you kind of have to understand sometimes too, right? Is that, especially you have to hit people on different mediums depending on where they are in their journey. So let's say if you have your podcast, right? Not everyone can listen to 2 hours, but they might listen to a 10-minute clip. And then
Yeah.
people who don't want to listen to a 10-minute clip might actually watch shorts. If they don't want to watch the shorts, they might watch a newsletter, might read a newsletter. They also might read your LinkedIn post, might read a tweet, and you follow the whole way down. And
Yeah.
that's not even a funnel. That's just more of a top of marketing or top of awareness marketing funnel, which is basically just the top of it. It's just the top of it. And I think that's at the very least how you're going to grow your podcast, right?
Head over to Jordan Checker Podcast to get the full exclusive experience.